What if a horn could echo the sea, though it's never touched the shore? What if a jade mask whispered, but no one knows in what tongue? And what if a stone doorway cracked, as if the sky chose it, and only it? Welcome to Unearthed Secrets, where the world's strangest artifacts are more than forgotten. They're unsolved. Every object tells a story. None tell the full truth. Subscribe, like, and share if you're watching from somewhere curious, and tell us what time it is where you are right now. The bronze jackal vessel that never spoke. Have you ever seen an object that looks back at you, not with eyes, but with stillness so deep, it feels as if it remembers you from before you were born? Somewhere between river silt and wind-blown silence, beneath a temple long worn down to ridges and foundation stones, there once lay a vessel, small, bronze, shaped like a jackal curled to rest, its mouth closed, its ears alert, its gaze cast not toward the world, but inward. It was never meant to pour or store, never sealed, nor opened. It was simply made, and it waited. They say it was found when no one was looking for it. A routine excavation outside the ruins of an unremarkable sanctuary just north of Saqqara, the very heart of Egypt's old religious complexes. A desert whisper of a find. No treasure, no tomb, just a hollow dug for a drainage trench and a bronze glint catching the sun. It was unearthed, like a thought you didn't know you'd forgotten. A shape smoothed by time, its carved paws drawn close to its sides, its tail wrapped delicately along the curve of the vessel's base. No inscriptions, no cartouche, just silent geometry, and something beneath it. The archaeologists would later describe the context as ritually sterile. That meant there were no bones, no ash, no offerings, no tools, just sand. And this object, nestled in a soft dip of ground like it had curled up to sleep there a very long time ago, and stayed. But this is not where the story begins. Let's drift back, not to a century ago nor even a millennium, but deeper still. Let the Nile swell in your mind, as it once did in its spring floods. Let the land be softer, the reeds taller. Hear the distant murmur of priests chanting beneath the stars. Now, step with me into a world lit by oil lamps, where breath and shadow mingle, and jackals are not beasts but watchers. You see, to the ancient Egyptians, the jackal was more than an animal. It was a guardian, a boundary creature, the one who walked at the edge of life and death, guiding the newly departed to where the scales would weigh their hearts. Anubis. But not all jackals were Anubis. Some perhaps were older, or stranger, or forgotten. There are accounts, tucked into fragmentary texts, of jackal spirits that guarded not tombs but secrets, not souls but silences. One scroll, damaged, badly faded, mentions a mute vessel given to the temple of Khenti Amentiu, he who is chief of the Westerners. An early jackal deity later merged with Anubis. The scroll doesn't describe what it looked like, only that it was never to be opened, spoken of, or placed near the living. And yet, here it is, the same form resting in museum-like now, cold and watched but untouched. Let us imagine it, long before that, when it was first shaped, not cast as bronze is usually poured, but hammered, folded, pressed. The ears formed last. Inside the vessel, nothing. No trace of ash or oil or scent, just polished emptiness. But it wasn't the kind of emptiness that's merely vacant. It was the kind that feels intentional, the kind that listens. Its paws, too, were peculiar. The front left was ever so slightly misaligned, as if whoever shaped it had tried to correct an earlier gesture. A step forward, then stopped. Why? Some theorized it was a design mistake. Others whispered it wasn't meant to move at all, that the step was halted on purpose, a kind of symbolic pause. Now the bronze itself bore no signs of inscriptions, but beneath one paw, during a microscopic analysis years later, a fine groove was detected, a spiral no larger than the width of a hair. It wasn't a scratch, it was deliberate, too precise, too purposeful. When mapped digitally, the spiral repeated a pattern matching not hieroglyphs but something older, a proto-script known from pre-dynastic tags, marks made before writing had rules. The pattern, when translated loosely through context and comparison, hinted at a phrase, "He who hears what is never said," and yet no sound had ever come from the jackal. No story, no origin, no noise. The vessel travelled quietly from the dig site to a holding facility, and from there to the Cairo Museum's lower archives. It was not deemed significant enough to display, yet too unusual to discard. Years passed. Then came a visitor, not a famous scholar, not a treasure hunter, just a linguist with a fondness for marginalia, notes in the corners of ancient texts, doodles, symbols drawn idly by scribes. She saw the jackal vessel by accident, Or maybe it saw her. The guard had propped open the archive door for air. Inside, shelves of unclassified or little-known artifacts waited, like books in a library when no one ever read. She passed it, paused, and looked again. She said later that it wasn't its beauty that stopped her. It was the feeling, like she'd interrupted a conversation, one that had been going on for centuries. She asked to examine it more closely. Gloves, light, tools, and then, the discovery. A sound, not from the vessel itself, but when light struck the bronze at a certain angle, the tiny spiral groove under the paw vibrated faintly, like a reed in wind. No machine picked up a frequency, but she felt it, a buzzing in the bone behind her ear, a breath along the inner wall of her skull. She listened again. Nothing. Then she tried something strange. She whispered, not to a person, or a recorder, or a notebook, just to the air, around the vessel. "I hear you." The buzzing stopped. Later, when she wrote her paper, never published, but still circulating in quiet corners of archaeological folklore, she included a single sentence near the end. Some silences do not mean absence. Some silences are full. The vessel was eventually placed in a sealed case. Not for protection, but out of caution. That room is no longer open to the public. The plaque simply reads Bronze Ritual Object. Third Intermediate Period, approx. 1070, 664 BCE, unknown function. But in the right quiet, beneath the desert wind or the hum of the museum air vents, some say the bronze surface shivers, that its shape reflects not the jackal, but the idea of one, a watcher, a listener. Not a god, not a demon, just a presence that remembers, and waits. It is said that jackals sometimes walk the edge of settlements not because they are hungry, but because they are curious. They watch us build, bury, burn. They do not intervene. But they notice. The bronze jackal vessel does not speak, but it notices. Perhaps that is why it was made, not to carry offerings, but to carry awareness of those who passed. Of those who dared speak truths they later buried, of those who whispered in fear and in reverence, and of us now who stare at it in dim museum light, wondering what was meant to be heard and what was never supposed to be known. When you next walk a quiet corridor, or stand at the edge of an old place whose name is lost, if the air feels thick, like a held breath, and the stillness listens, remember the jackal, and do not speak. Just feel, and know it hears you. The Whispering Jade Fish Mask. There is a room in the Palace Museum in Beijing that most visitors pass by without noticing. It is quiet, not by design but by some natural effect of the way sound behaves near its walls. Footsteps seem to dull in its presence, voices lower without effort, and those who do step inside often pause, inexplicably, as if entering a room still occupied by something just barely remembered. The artifact is not large. It fits inside a single case, unremarkable in scale or presentation. And yet, almost everyone who enters this quiet corner finds themselves pausing for longer than expected. There's something unsettlingly watchful about the thing they've come to see. It does not blink. It does not move, but it holds attention as surely as if it had spoken. It is a mask, oval and smooth, carved from a single piece of pale jade, the green of deep ocean water, where the mouth should be. A fish's lips curl outward, where a human's nose might be. Small gills have been etched instead. The eyes are wide, almost round, and ringed with grooves that spiral outward, like ripples. It is the face of neither man nor beast, but something in between, something imagined or remembered. It has no known name, no record of its creator, no consensus on its age. Officially, the label calls it a ritual object, the kind of term used when archaeologists can agree on little else. Beneath that, a more cautious line: probable late Neolithic origin, Liangzhu culture, function unknown. But there is another story, not on the label, not in the museum, not even in the official excavation records. It begins with a whispered word in a university archive, a name that appears only once in a forgotten 1926 expedition journal: Yuying. Yuying was a village, once, before the reservoir swallowed it, before the dam, before roads reached that part of Zhejiang province, before maps gave it a label, and long before they removed it again. And in Yuying, it is said, there was a cave, not the kind that tourists explore, not one with lanterns or guide ropes, but a true cave, a mouth in the earth, shaded by ancient trees, where the stones are cold even in summer, and where no birds build nests. The villagers said the cave breathed, that it exhaled mist when the moon was full. that children who entered came out changed quiet, with strange dreams, with distant stares. No one lived near it, no one grew crops near it, and for a very long time, no one entered it at all, until in the winter of 1926, a foreign scholar arrived. His name was Dr. Henry Latham, an ethnographer from Cambridge, fascinated by pre-dynastic Chinese cultures. He had heard rumors of ancient jade relics unearthed near the reservoir construction site, artifacts of an unknown people, carved long before the Zhou or Shang. But he hadn't come for jades, not really. He had come because of the Whisper. A graduate student, barely remembered now, had returned from a short survey trip with a strange tale. A family, still living in the hills above the reservoir, kept a drawing pinned above their hearth. The student had copied it. The image showed a smooth face with fish-like features and an open mouth. Beneath it, curling lines like waves, or perhaps sound. When asked, the grandmother of the house said only this: "It was worn when the lake spoke." Dr. Latham went to find the cave. He did not return alone. His journals, which would vanish from public record until their rediscovery in 1983, describe a narrow fissure in the hillside, one that opened onto a descending path of carved stone steps, too regular to be natural. Inside, he found bones, human he thought, though scattered and incomplete. Offerings, perhaps. He also found the mask. It lay on a stone plinth. Not buried, not hidden, waiting. He described touching it, feeling a pulse, like distant drums, through his fingertips. He took it back to his rented quarters. That night, he dreamed of water. Deep water, of something rising through it, slowly, slowly, with eyes like jade. The next morning, the village elder came to his door and said one word: return. Latham did not return it. He left Ewing that same day. 6 months later, he would be found in a hotel in Hong Kong, wide-eyed and insensible, repeating only a single phrase in his native tongue: "It listens when we breathe." The mask passed through collectors' hands for decades, each time with a story of strangeness. A diver who claimed to hear voices in their helmet when transporting it across the harbor. A child who woke from sleepwalking to find it beside them on the floor. A house whose mirrors began fogging over only on one side, always the side facing the mask. Eventually, it was donated anonymously to the museum in Beijing, but not before one last tale. The woman who delivered it, wrapped tightly in cotton and jade velvet, told a guard at the gate, "You must keep it dry. Never let the mist touch it. That's when it speaks." The museum, of course, does not repeat such stories. It keeps the mask in a climate-controlled case, sealed and monitored, and yet, still the stories come. A janitor who heard gurgling sounds when alone on the night shift. A curator who swore she saw condensation inside the sealed glass, tiny beads of water near the mask's mouth. Visitors who claim the room smells faintly of salt. No scientific basis, they say. No proof. But let us return, quietly now, to the mask itself. It is carved from Shuyan jade, named for a region in Liaoning, prized for its smoothness and waxy luster. But the quarry that once produced such jade closed centuries ago, and the particular hue of this mask, almost blue-green, veined with white like sea foam, has no exact match among known samples. The carving is too precise to be purely ceremonial. The inner surface, where a wearer's face might rest, is curved to fit a real human contour. There are indentations for straps. It was meant to be worn, not displayed, but why? Some theories speak of transformation, that the mask allowed its wearer to speak with water spirits, or to call fish during famine, that it was a shaman's tool, an amphibious face to cross between elements. Others suggest a funerary use, that the dead were dressed as offerings to river gods, and the mask was their voice. Still others believe it was used only once, for a ritual never repeated, a call that was heard, a response, not. There are deeper theories. That the mask was not meant to resemble a fish, but a listener. That it was not made to resemble something found in water, but something that lives beneath it. That it was not designed by the Liangzhu at all, but given to them, given. There are legends, now mostly forgotten, of a time when the lakes were still seas, when inland China was crisscrossed with channels and salt marshes, when people fished not with boats, but from stilted towers, and sang songs to the depths. Those songs, it is said, were answered. Not always in language, not always in kindness. The mask, some say, is a remnant of that exchange, not a gift, a tool, or a warning. One researcher, anonymous in publication but known among quiet circles, has proposed a more disturbing idea. that the mask is not a voice, but an ear, that when worn, it does not let you speak to something else. It lets something else listen. She describes sitting alone in the museum's observation room, reviewing footage of the mask over long periods. On one particular night, during a heavy rain, the audio log captured a low hum, not a malfunction, not a frequency from outside, but something beneath the normal range of human hearing. A presence, when adjusted and filtered. The hum broke into patterns, not words, not music, but something like breathing, rhythmic, slow, patient. She shut off the recording and never resumed the study. The museum has since added extra security to the mask's exhibit, not because of theft concerns, but because several visitors attempted to touch the glass. One succeeded. He was found hours later, sitting on a bench in another wing of the museum, murmuring in a language no one could identify. He claimed he had seen an eye blink from inside the mask. Security footage was inconclusive. The lighting flickered. There was a reflection, nothing more, but still, the whispers continued. One final note, drawn from an obscure regional folktale collected in the 1940s before the village of Yuxing was submerged. It tells of a girl named Lillian, who vanished on the night of the silver carp moon, a name given to the midsummer full moon that hangs low and bright over the water. She had been seen walking toward the cave. The tale says she wore a necklace of river pearls and carried a fish carved from green stone. Her parents called her name, but she did not answer. Only the wind came back. Days later they found her footprints in the mud outside the cave, but none led out. The storyteller ends the tale, not with sorrow, but with a warning. Some mouths are not made to sing, some masks are not meant to be worn, and some things in the water remember us still. Back in the museum, the mask remains still. Its surface gleams faintly, like wet stone, its mouth slightly parted, waiting. And though no sound escapes, those who pass close swear they hear something, not a voice, not exactly, but the idea of one, like the shape of speech, like breath before a word. And perhaps one day someone will hear what it's trying to say, or perhaps they already have, and chose, wisely, not to answer. Let the mask sleep, let it listen, if it must, but do not speak back. Because somewhere, far below the rivers and lakes we think we know, something is still listening, and it remembers our names. The frozen girl who smiled in ice. There are places in the world where silence is not the absence of sound, but a presence all its own. Not the hush of a quiet room, or the stillness after snowfall. This silence is older, deeper. It lives in the wind that brushes against stone, in the thin air that tastes of minerals and memory, in the breath you hold without realizing why. High in the Andes, such silence gathers, above the tree line, above the birds, above the reach of even the hardiest shepherds. The mountains breathe in snow and time. They remember things long forgotten by those who dwell below. And on one such mountain, whose name has faded from maps and from mouths, there is a place where the silence became a shrine. It was there, cradled in the cold arms of a volcanic slope, that they found her. She was not hidden, not buried, not locked in stone. She sat beneath the sky itself, surrounded by nothing but rock and ice. Her body, impossibly preserved, still bore the smooth cheeks of childhood. Her hair was dark, braided neatly down her back. Her clothes were simple, woven by hand in a style that had not been worn in centuries, and her face was smiling. Not the soft curve of sleep, not the joy of play, but something quieter, a smile that knew something, a smile caught at the very edge of breath. They called her La Doncella, the maiden, but long before she became a museum artifact, long before she was catalogued and studied and placed in a climate-controlled chamber, she had another name, a name lost to firelight and footpaths, a name whispered only in Quechua, long ago, in a hut that no longer stands. And that name, whatever it was, had once been spoken with love. She was not alone on the mountain. 2 other children were found near her, one younger, one older, but it was she who sat at the highest point, she who had been placed with the most care, she whose expression stirred something deep in those who saw her. But no record tells us where she came from. No carving, no tablet, no scroll. The Inca left many things behind. Terraces, temples, a road system so vast that its remnants still guide hikers today. But they did not write books. They passed memory from mouth to mouth, like seeds carried on wind. And the wind, as always, forgot. So what we know of her, we guess, and the story we tell, you must let it settle over you slowly, like snow, like altitude, like the hush of a world that has not spoken for 500 years. She would have been chosen, that much we know, to be brought to the mountains as she was, not as a criminal, nor as a servant, but as an offering, meant she was considered pure, special, perhaps noble-born, perhaps not. In the eyes of the empire, such distinctions did not always matter. What mattered was that she be perfect. The Inca believed the mountains were alive, not merely geological, but sacred. Each towering peak was an apu, a spirit, a protector, a watcher of the lands. And when drought struck, or war threatened, or the emperor sought favor from the heavens, gifts were made to the apus. Some were golden statues, some were woven cloth, and some were children, chosen, blessed, sent to dwell with the mountain gods in a realm beyond death. This was not sacrifice, as we think of it now. It was not seen as cruel or unkind. It was, to the Inca, an elevation, a gift of their most unblemished lives to the powers that shaped the world. And so one day a girl with dark eyes and a patient smile began a journey. She would not have walked alone. There would have been priests, guards, a procession, perhaps even music. They would have brought offerings, shells from the sea, corn beer, miniature llamas carved from silver. They would have walked for weeks, maybe months, climbing higher than crops could grow, higher than animals could graze, into the realm of wind and ice. She would have known, she would have understood, and she would have been brave. Near the summit, they built a platform of stones. They laid her upon it with ceremony, dressed her in her finest clothes, tucked coca leaves in her cheeks to ease her breath, and then they left. There were no screams, no struggle. The cold did what it always does, and when the final breath left her lungs, the mountain kept her. The air at that altitude is dry. The cold, constant, time folds in on itself. Decay halts. The flesh does not rot, it hardens. The blood does not spoil, it stills. She did not vanish into the dirt. She remained, and over the centuries, the snow drifted past her. The clouds brushed her face, and she stayed, undisturbed, as empires rose and fell far below. No one came looking for her. Her name was not passed down. Her village, if it still existed, had forgotten. Her family, if they survived, had learned not to speak of the dead who were given to the gods. But the mountain remembered, until one day, 500 years later, a team of climbers stumbled upon something unusual, a hint of fabric, a shape that was not stone, and the silence, which had always been there, seemed to press closer. They radioed down, excavated carefully, and slowly, from beneath a blanket of centuries, she returned. The museum was not built for her. It was built for fossils, minerals, bones, cold things, still things. But when they brought her down from the mountain and placed her behind the glass, something changed in the air. Visitors came expecting science. They left unsettled. It wasn't her expression, not exactly, though that faint, knowing smile was hard to forget. It wasn't her clothes, though they were perfectly intact. It wasn't even her hair, still glossy and smooth. It was her presence. She felt like someone, not something. Security staff spoke of shadows that moved where no one stood, of display lights flickering only in her case. One janitor claimed to hear soft humming while cleaning near the glass. Another refused to work past dusk. But there were no explanations. No sensors tripped, no heat signatures registered. Just her, watching, smiling, waiting. Her body had secrets, of course. CT scans revealed the coca leaves still tucked in her cheek. Her organs, shrunken but intact. Her lungs still held air. Her skin still bore the faintest impressions of her final garments. There was no sign of violence, no disease. She had simply gone to sleep. But sleep does not last forever. In the years following her discovery, strange reports began to surface. Not from scientists, but from travelers. The hikers who ventured near the place she had been found. Tour guides who led groups up similar slopes. Locals whose grandparents told old stories. They all spoke of the same thing. A figure, small, distant, seen just at the edge of vision. Not frightening, not chasing, just watching, always watching. They called her La Niña del Hielo, the girl of the ice. And when they described her, they always mentioned the smile. You must understand, there is no proof of this. No photographs, no recordings, only stories. And perhaps that is fitting. For she too exists only because someone told her story, someone remembered, someone noticed. But what is it, exactly, that makes her story linger? Is it the preservation? The impossibility of such a perfect face after 500 years? Is it the loneliness of her fate? The cold she endured? The silence she accepted? Or is it something else? Something we do not have words for? Something that lives in the breath we catch when we see her? Something that says quietly, "You are not the first to walk this earth," because she is still there. Not just in the glass case, not just in the museum brochures, but in the high air of the Andes, in the whisper of frost along a mountaintop, and sometimes in dreams. People who have seen her, truly seen her, report dreams that return weeks later, dreams of walking ancient roads, of weaving cloth by firelight, of climbing, always climbing, toward a sky that feels close enough to touch. They do not speak Quechua. They do not know the faces in their dreams, but they wake with a strange sadness, a longing for a home that never belonged to them. In time, perhaps, we will forget her again. Time does that. Names slip away, languages fade, but not always. Some things hold on. A braid tied just so, a garment stitched with care, a smile that asks no questions and gives no answers. Just the echo of something larger than us, older than us, a child, frozen in time, smiling still, as if she knows something we do not, as if the mountain is not done with her yet, as if her story is still unfolding, quietly, slowly in the cold, where the air is thin, and the silence listens, and the gods remember. The iron knife that burned stone. There are knives you expect to corrode in rust and forgetfulness, and then there are knives that seem to remember. This is the story of one such blade. It was found not in tombs, nor pricey display cases, but tucked away inside layers of hardened volcanic ash on a plateau in eastern Turkey, a place where ancient calderas once roamed, and now only silence and basalt fields remain. They called it the Sizdag knife, named after a nearby dormant volcano. When the team first uncovered it, it lay beside scorched bark and charcoal, evidence of a fire so fierce the glacier at thousands of feet high twisted its shapes. But most oddly, the knife lay on cooled stone that bore razor-thin slices, lines cut into the basalt that would require a tool much harder than iron. Yet the blade showed no rust, no pitting, only a sheen, black and silver both, so precise it looked new, almost like it had been carved by the ash itself. Archaeologists described the scene in hushed wonder. They found the knife near stacks of stone shards carved similarly, long scratches aligned in parallel, as though someone traced stripes into the earth. But once the ash hardened, those marks persisted. The blade rested atop them. It was wrapped in linen, tightly pressed. No blood residue, no organic decay, just the knife and the marks. The finest analysis suggested the blade was from the late Bronze Age, around 1200 BCE. That placed it in the twilight of Hittite lands, when fortresses dotted the Anatolian highlands, and kingdoms exchanged tribute in metals and grain. Iron had been rare then, so a knife like this, well-made, shapely hilt, razor edge, would have signaled wealth. Yet here it lay, untouched by time. Who buried it? No human remains, no tools, no bones, only the scorch marks in basalt, the lines long and shallow, and the knife resting above them. But analysis showed something curious. The slice marks on stone matched the edge angle on the blade. It wasn't accidental. This knife had cut into stone, not once, but repeatedly. They tried to recreate it on fresh basalt with other Bronze Age replicas. Nothing could score the way the ancient stone had been scored. Only tungsten carbide tools, used in modern drills, came close. Historians scratched their heads. Either the blade was impossible for its time, or the people who held it had knowledge lost to time. And if that were the case, what else did they lose? One researcher, working late, found a detail no one expected. Microabrasion along the blade's tip showing silica particles, mineral traces not local to that plateau. More puzzling, the linen wrap encasing the knife yielded trace elements of volcanic glass, obsidian, embedded in the weave. It suggested the knife had been used near volcanic action, or perhaps even made there. One lead metallurgist said privately, the blade cut the earth itself, not metaphorically, literally. There were rumors, quiet whispers in the field, that villagers on the slopes of Sistag spoke of the Yanan Bachak, the burning knife passed down in memory. A blade used once every century to carve runes in rock before the earth spoke back. But such stories are never spoken to foreigners. Words are precious in ash-covered land. The knife was eventually taken down to a lab near Konya, placed in a sealed case, fitted with acoustic detectors and video cameras. What they recorded changed everything. Late one night, in radiant heat from the tungsten bulbs, the blade shifted, a barely visible tremor, like a breath, and the stone slices beneath it reflected flickers of light, as if the marks were glowing faintly. There was no movement of air, no anomaly logged, except in footage. A narrow beam captured just enough motion to show the blade vibrating, at a microscopic scale, not visible with the naked eye, but detected and reproduced. It became the centerpiece of a private study on ancient energy tools, but the study was hushed after the lead engineer refused to turn over spectrum readings, indicating infrared emissions from the blade at exactly 490 Hz, the same frequency as certain geological resonances during volcanic seismic activity. When questioned, he whispered, "It's as if the knife remembers fire." Soon after, his apartment burned in a small kitchen blaze. His manuscripts never recovered. Then the rumors began. Other blades were recovered. Not iron but copper or bronze, brought from nearby digs, yet only the iron knife could score stone. Others dulled. Some locals claimed to recognize the knife's etching pattern in old basalt petroglyphs further down the valley, lines and arcs matching, meaning, no one knows. The blade scoffed at definitions. It just was, and still is. Hidden now behind glass, rust-free, the case cooled by dry air, bore a label reading, "Iron knife, Hittite, late Bronze Age, function unclear, no sign of corrosion." Not comforting, not explanatory, but intriguing. Because now, even nights after closing, monitoring cameras occasionally pick up a flicker, neither heat nor light, but a reflected pattern, lines along the stone that shift under the knife's contact, almost like a circuit, almost as if the knife is alive. What does any of this mean? Some scholars propose the blade might be meteoritic iron, cooled violently in volcanic flame, but analyses show oxygen isotopes inconsistent with that theory. Others suggest heat treatment unknown in antiquity, but the structure of the crystal matrix implies slow hammer forging, cold work, not casting, not forging. That means someone meticulously handled it, and then buried it, perhaps to protect it, perhaps to hide it, perhaps to seal it away. It wasn't discovered until the glacier around it melted slightly. In 2025, after unusually warm winters, the plateau cracked. Among the fissures, someone found another carving, a symbol on the rock matching scratches beneath the knife. It looked like a spiral enclosed in a triangle. The same symbol appeared on a broken clay tablet found in Hattusa, ancient Hittite capital. But that tablet, in a museum vault, had been labeled scribbles and ignored. Now when compared, they match almost exactly. Could it be the knife carried a memory, etched in fire and stone that others once recorded in clay? The tablet says something like, "By this blade, the earth and flame will see a truth." Not helpful, not comforting, just more smoke. Some caretakers of the museum refuse to leave the area alone. They sweep near the display nightly, whispering a quiet goodbye. The blade hums gently in its case during rainstorms. Scientists have caught micro-variations in magnetic fields near the edge once tested on basalt. Readings spike when soft drizzle hits the wall, but when struck lightly by metal, the knife resonates, like bells in wind. Not copper or wood, pure resonance. A resonance not audible, but present on recordings. As of now, the knife rests in a secured chamber, not on public display. Cameras record every hour. Sensors log temperature, moisture, electromagnetic field. Some nights, especially thunderstorms, the logging shifts, power transformers fluctuate, sensors react, engineers call it interference. But a geologist says there's no reason for such anomalies at that station. Only one fact remains. The knife doesn't rust, it doesn't dull, it doesn't fade, it is iron. Yet iron did not hold, something else did. A purpose, a touch, a memory. Sometimes museum staff come in early. They turn their backs to the case, then hear, not words, but the suggestion of friction, like stone scratching, not on the basalt beneath, but in the air. What would you say if you heard stone speak? That's what some have described inside the suppressed report, stone groaning beneath the blade's presence, not physically, not loud, but low, a vibration that only your bones heard, a frequency the knife seemed tuned to. Earthborn, stone-forged, fire-tempered, human-handled, and now, silent, until someone stirs, or the ash shifts, or time trembles. This knife plucked its way from earth to flame, to ice, to glass, to memory. But it did more than take. It touched, it marked, it listened. Not to life, but to solidity. It found the edge of being, carved it, then waited, for someone to notice, for someone to remember, and perhaps, for someone to ask, what truth burns beneath? Because if a knife can score stone, not rust, not dull, not disappear, then perhaps some edges do not exist to cut, but to record, to seal, to awaken. The portal stones of Sacsayhuaman that fit too precisely. They say the silence of stones begins where sound ends. Not the quiet of untouched earth, but the stillness that persists when centuries pass without breath. In the high fortress of Sacsayhuaman above the city of Cusco, the Inca built walls of stone so immense, so precise, you can slide a single sheet of paper between them and feel nothing move. No mortar, no sutures, just edges shaped, polished and locked for eternity. Imagine walking beside these walls at dusk, the stones shining golden, massive cheeks looming over you, and beyond them, mountains, silent, watching. Your steps echo faintly against basalt better matched than any drawer fitted in a cabinet, and in that echo, you feel the weight of a technique lost, the weight of a people who carved without measure, yet never measured error. Tonight, let's walk inside those stones. Let's imagine the hands that shaped them. Let's listen to what they might still be saying. They pulled them from quarries miles away, cavernous blocks, heavier than elephants, yet somehow transported up switchbacks, across rivers, through valleys carved in stone toward a city just beginning. It must have taken thousands, line after line of men, weaving ropes, propping livers, whispering prayers to the Apis. Could they have known what they'd create? Because at Sacsayhuaman, the walls are not built with fussy angles or right-angled bricks. They curve, wave, spiral, they flow against the earth. Some stones are more than 3 meters tall, shaped deliberately to fit their neighbor like puzzle pieces. But not puzzle pieces carved to match. Spaces are irregular, sloping, organic, yet there is no gap, no mortar, no sign of collapse through earthquakes. They say not even a rabbit could crawl through the wall. That precision should have been impossible, and yet, it endures. Suppose you stood before the largest of the portal stones, block 15, measuring 8 tons, carved into a shape that matches the stones above, below, beside it. Not square, but a flowing polygon that looks more like a living thing than a rock. Imagine you place a finger on one edge, and then slide it toward the next, and your skin does not catch, not even a hair stands still. The surface is so polished that the light reflects white, so even that you think you see motion. But decay confirms the walls have not settled. The land has not wanted them. The walls were completed in the 15th century, just before the empire's fall, but many stones today don't even show tool marks. The surfaces feel frozen by practice, chisel strokes, so even they vanish beneath a sheen. Tool marks so shallow you need a microscope to see them. Yet, someone shaped them with a technique that feels more digital than manual. Let me tell you a legend. A Quechua storyteller once said, "The stones sang when the sun first warmed their faces." She said when the light hits them at dawn, the surfaces emit a hum too low for most ears, but too strong for flesh. An engineer measured it once, a resonance, a vibration, an echo, coming from the stone, no fabrication, no speakers pulsing at voltage, stone humming to itself. Now imagine the portal stones. They were placed to guard the city gate to the east, where the sunrise met the fortress, as if the light of the new day needed guardians, and during the summer solstice, when the sun rose directly through the portal, it cast no shadow, because the space was perfect, its edges too precise to subtract light. It was a portal, not just a gate, a frame, for time. By 1535, the Spanish arrived. They saw the walls. They marveled. They called them walls, the giants built. Spaniards could not replicate it. Even modern engineers struggled to fit one block to another without adjustment. Colonial records claim the stones spoke to the moonlight, that during full moon festivals, priests placed offerings at the base and reported whispers from between the cracks. Not voices, not curses, but echoes, as though the wall remembered ritual. Temple echoes, mountain echoes. A people shouting upward, and the wall responding. There are reports once passed quietly between museum staff that if one slides ice or snow across the surface, the friction generates a tone, a ringing, a note. One winter visitor said that after tracing her hand along the stones, She saw patterns form in the Thor marks, lines not random but symmetrical, like designs mirroring shapes found in church windows far away, shapes no Inca could know. She traced one pattern on paper, described it later, not geometry, rhythm, and then she fell silent. No excavation found quarry tools large enough to shape some of the bigger stones or to polish them so smoothly. Some think manpower alone can't explain the feat, that ancient artisans worked by candlelight, tracing lines and smoothing them, paper-thin adjustments. How long does that take, and why such effort? What message did they shape in these stones? After a century of European occupation, the walls were looted, stones moved, displays constructed, yet the portal stones remained. Tumult came, fire, earth, but the walls stayed. Even modern seismic shifts knock sensors in the city, but no cracks appear. Some geologists describe it as the miracle of Inca masonry, and the portal stones framed like guards. They survived it all. But what if the wall was more than sculpture? What if it was, in a sense, alive? That the edges weren't just static shapes, but tuned frequencies, that each stone had a pitch, a resonance, a history. Stone thy voice, separated by centuries and still heard. There is a current study, confidential, comparing the resonance frequencies of these stones to low Earth seismic hums. The match is eerie. One stone emits 0.3 Hz, another 0.38 Hz. Those frequencies correspond with tectonic micro-vibrations recorded at the base of the fault line kilometers below. It's spectral coincidence, or something else. Stone listening. So if you walk the fortress after dusk, when the crowds vanish, when tourists go back to Cusco, the portal stones are lit softly. You see the surfaces glint, you feel the perfect fit, you may even hear it, a humming, not thunder, not traffic, stillness resonating back. If you lean in, you might feel it vibrate faintly, through leather shoes, through cold skin, as though the stone is humming to an earth it holds, keeping time. No official statement explains it, no tour guide repeats it, but pilgrims still come. Each May they lay coca leaves in the base of one portal, tiny offerings, petals, silver coins. Some carry cold violets also. They leave them, and stand, in silence, not waiting for sound, but listening for memory. You can't buy a stone like that. They weren't built for market. They weren't built for trophy. They were built to last, and last they do. When empires fade, when roads crumble, when cities vanish, stone remains, but stone like Sacsayhuaman, that fit too precisely, resonated hum to hum, remembered how to connect. Stone like that asks its own questions. Questions not of what it is, but of when it was made, and who remembered to listen. So when you lie awake tonight, imagine giants carving stone in candlelight. Imagine pulses through rock, echo in silence. Imagine stone humming underground, waiting, remembering, guarding. The gold tubes that hum at night. They were discovered buried beneath thick volcanic clay in a narrow vault sealed for centuries. Not a tomb, not a treasure trove, just a sealed chamber carved from earth, possibly by people who knew the mountain could breathe. A discovery meant to stay hidden until the doors split open during a seismic survey. Inside lay a cluster of golden tubes. Each was hollow, unopened, and about a foot long, smooth, sealed at both ends. No decoration, no inscription, just metal, warm, luminous, defying the damp. When touched at the rim, lightly, almost reverently, they rang. Not like silver, not like brass, not like gold at all. They emitted a note so low, the sound was felt in the bones. A hum that trembled in the spine, not in the air. What were they? I want you to close your eyes and imagine climbing that mountain. The wind growing colder with every step. The air thinner, greener, darker, moss giving way to rock, rock giving way to ice. A cave mouth yawning before you, unmarked. Inside light from torches, a narrow passage carved by water over centuries. You duck and enter into a hollow, a small platform of stone, carved, not natural. The floor is dusted with ash. A single step beyond that, and your lantern's glow picks up a shimmer. Gold, that's gold. Tubes laid side by side, aligned, like instruments in an orchestra. Silent instruments. You pick one up with gloved hands. It's heavier than you'd expect. Gravity unfamiliar in your fingers, as though holding something meant for another world. You gently strike one rim with a fingernail. It vibrates, a deep, resonant vibration that spreads through your chest and plunges into silence again. So begins our journey. They weren't just gold, they were extraordinary. So pure they resisted corrosion, so perfectly cast, they seemed unbroken by time. Radiocarbon testing on the cloth thread binding them suggests they're from around 1100 T, predating Spanish contact, crafted by the Taurona culture near modern-day Taurona Park. Gold was plentiful there, but only the elite handled it, and few objects so symmetrical and sealed were ever found. No lid, no cavity, nothing inside but air. But that air echoes. Archaeologists tried to cut one open, hoping to find centuries-old residue or insects frozen in time. The metal rang each time a tool touched it, muting before contact. Something in the metal resisted being opened. When a crack finally formed, the tone deepened and spread to the stone floor. A high-pitched hiss followed, then discharge across the amplifiers. And then the technicians swore they heard chanting too faint to understand, but layered like listening through water. They backed away, paused, and sealed the vault again. For months, linguists researching indigenous dialects pored through handwritten field notes. They found descriptions from local elders swept up in the initial excavation. Phrases like oro que respira, breathing gold, and sonidos de antes del mundo, sounds from before the world. Neither scholar could translate beyond poetic speculation. A visiting audio-visual team sat alone in the vault for 40 minutes. No wind, no center will, only the tubes on display. At minute 38, a vibration began, barely perceptible. Soon after, the lights dimmed for exactly 2 seconds as though the power cycle had paused. A single tube hopped, a thimble motion, yet remained intact. 2 years later, a small plaque in the regional museum read, "Ritually sealed gold cylinders, C1100 CE, acoustic resonance noted, purpose unidentified." That's all. No theory, no context, no plaque mention of calling forth stones or sound. They hum at night. A geologist visiting the site later noticed that the underlying rock floor had scoring tiny striations carved into basalt, lines too regular to be natural, patterns reminiscent of sound wave patterns. He took core samples. Inside one cylinder, metallurgical analysis revealed a crystalline structure nearly impossible to forge at the time, a metal tempered at extremely low temperatures to align atoms in a resonance grid. High-tech labs later confirmed the internal grain structure matched modern acoustic engineering design, though no known culture at the time had microscopes, thermometers, or steel. This suggests either astonishing ancient precision or something else entirely. Villagers in coastal towns still recount legends passed from their elders, stories of strangers visiting long ago from the mountains, carrying tubes of light, that when the wind blew at dusk, they played melodies not heard by human ears, but felt in bones, that the tubes once served as messenger, for storms, for tide, for long-forgotten ceremonies, and then were laid to rest when the old world ended. They say those rituals died not from conquest, but from forgetting, but the tubes survived, and they wait. When the vault reopened under modern supervision, acoustic engineers retested the tubes. One was gently tapped in an anechoic chamber. The hum rumbled for 46 seconds, a single sustained frequency. The machine logged the event, not words but energy. One engineer claimed he felt dizzy. Another reported déjà vu, memories from dreams of chanting made by voices unhuman. Later he said it felt as if the mountain itself spoke, through metal. The tubes hum at night. They hum until hearing resists hearing. They hum until description fails. The excavation team studied the geometry of the tubes. They found embedded pollen grains, plant DNA, not found near the vault. Genetic analysis traced them to valley flora 50 kilometers away, suggesting the tubes had traveled or rituals had been performed in multiple bioregions, possibly to commune with high-altitude spirits and lowland waters simultaneously, a ritual merging. Water, wind, fire, sound, gold. Not even an offering, but a message. Video footage captured something else, a blue-green glow around the tubes, seen only in long exposure frames. Some think it's phosphorescence from biogold bacteria. Others suggest a residual charge, a residual presence too slow for immediate detection. On moonlit nights, light spills into the vault, passing through ground cracks where crystals in the stone refract. The tubes reflect only that shimmer, not torchlight, not even overhead LEDs, only moon-aligned spectrums. At infrasound frequencies, monitors record spikes coinciding with lunar tides. The resonance grows near full moon. The same nights villagers say old songs echo in wind. Security staff whisper that objects left near the tubes sometimes move overnight, not due to settling. One caretaking journal noted a fingerprint smudge across one tube, though no staff entered after hours. Yet the smudge was not on the outside, it was internal, a burn mark, as though someone had traced a symbol with flame inside the gold. But the metal never melted. You see, gold is soft, yet these tubes remain unmarked, unbent, unflawed, but not empty. No one knows what the tubes are for, not their original purpose, not why they hum, not how the ancients believed gold carried sound. There was talk about resonance in ritual bottles, but those only conjecture. Some believe the tubes were tuned by sight, to hum when exposed to the wind rhythm between mountains, a primitive sonic antenna, a communicator across valleys, a bridge. A visiting director of a national museum asked to examine one tube alone. He placed it on a wooden table, tapped it, and whispered, "Listen." Silence. He tapped again. Hum. The room vibrated. He gasped. That evening, he wrote in his journal, "I heard the heart of the mountain." The next morning he donated the tubes to the government anonymously. He told no one how or why. The tubes now rest in a climate-controlled vault with minimal light. Researchers place ice chips near them occasionally. The chill causes faint condensation around each opening, forming rings of mist that evaporate after seconds. But in those moments, if you listen, you can feel the hum through the mist, a resonance not just in metal, but in water molecules. This occurs around every geographic solstice. The same weeks experts chart rainfall anomalies in ancient records. Some keepers believe the tubes are not instruments of sound, but of fate, that the hum they emit is not a note, but a timeline, a still pulse, a vow pressed into gold, and the vault is not a lock, but a womb, waiting. If you close your eyes now, imagine reaching out and gently tapping a golden cylinder. Hear the hum, feel it echo, not in your hearing, but in your bones. Wonder, who first struck these tubes? For what voice, what sound in the deep, and what message still hums? The clay tablet, that translated its own symbols, in a museum basement, beneath layers of catalogued memory, and dust too old to date, there is a box, a wooden box, smooth from handling, its hinges groaning with the kind of tiredness only ancient things possess. And inside this box, unremarkable at first glance, is a clay tablet, no larger than a man's open palm. It is not gilded, or inlaid. It bears no carvings of gods, or kings, no seal of ownership. It is only covered in rows upon rows of wedge-shaped script, curling inward, spiraling gently, as if to fold in on itself. This is where the story begins, or perhaps ends. They called it an anomaly. When it first emerged from the dirt during a heat-soaked excavation in southern Iraq, the tablet was mistaken for a duplicate, an old-school exercise, one of many training tablets used by apprentice scribes in the city-states of Sumer thousands of years ago. After all, such tablets are common. Students repeating the names of birds, types of fish, words for flood, storm, shadow, basic knowledge carved into clay, fired by sun or kiln. But there was something different here, something the archaeologists couldn't name, though many tried. At first it was the density. Most training tablets are sparse, spaced for learning. This one was not. The script was continuous, flowing, without breaks or margin, almost like a single breath, held too long. Then came the realization, many of the signs repeated, not just in form, but in placement, as if one section of the tablet was referencing another, explaining it, like a glossary, or a dialogue, or a mind, speaking to itself. They brought it indoors, into silence, under glass and filtered light, and as the linguists circled the artifact, they felt something, a tension, not fear, exactly, but a hum beneath the skin, the sense that you were being watched by something very still, and so they began to read. The first layer was straightforward, cuneiform, Sumerian dialect, early 3rd millennium BCE. It spoke of hills, of herds, of harvests, nothing surprising. But nestled within those lines were irregularities, symbols that didn't belong, shapes never before seen, angles carved at variance from standard form. Some were near identical to known glyphs, but not quite, as if mimicking language, or disguising something within it. And then there it was, a line with a symbol beside it, a mark, then the same line again, in different wording, over and over, as if the tablet was translating itself, explaining its own secrets. One scholar, a woman with 40 years of field experience, and a reputation for skepticism, stared at the tablet for hours without speaking. Then she left, quietly. Her notes were sparse, a single line, scribbled in the corner of her journal, not written for us. She never returned to the project, Theories began to multiply. Some believed it was a lost pedagogical tool, an ancient Rosetta Stone designed for internal use by temple scribes. Others believed it was a linguistic curiosity, a language folding back on itself, a recursive artifact from a culture exploring the boundaries of communication. But there were those fringe thinkers, careful ones, who proposed something else, that the tablet was not just explaining, it was speaking, not to us, not to gods, but to itself, as if it were alive in its own way. Language, you see, is not only for communication, it is a tool for structure, for thought, for time. The Sumerians knew this better than most. They were among the first to mark hours, to divide space, to name the things that passed, and they believed deeply in the power of naming, that to name a thing was to hold it, that knowledge was weight, and this tablet, this small sun-baked relic, was heavy, not in size, in silence. There were dreams too. The interns who catalogued it reported them first. Vague, unformed things, long corridors filled with dust, with voices whispering, not in words, but in rhythm, the pacing of footsteps on dry earth, the tapping of reeds on soft clay, the sound of something being written, again and again, even as it fades. One young man claimed he saw the tablet in his sleep, but larger, impossibly large, unfolding like a scroll, revealing layer after layer of text, spiraling inward until the center became a whole. He woke up with his hands outstretched, palms open, fingers twitching, as if still etching symbols into air. He asked to be reassigned. He refused to handle clay of any kind. The museum staff rotated, as they always do. Exhibits were updated, but the tablet remained in the archives. Researchers would occasionally request access, but few stayed long. Some said they lost time while studying it, that they would look up, and hours had passed. Others complained of the feeling that someone had just left the room, even when alone. But the most unsettling report came from a linguist who had worked on Sumerian inscription decoding software. She was feeding known segments of the tablet into her program, hoping for transliteration assistance. And as the lines processed, the software began generating definitions, not translations, definitions, semantic approximations. Then it began predicting. Her console displayed messages not found in the tablet itself, yet oddly coherent. Fragments like, "The thing not spoken bears the shape of thought," symbols remember what tongues forget, "I am written so I will not forget myself." And then one final line before the system crashed, "When I forget, I will be dust again." It was dismissed as a glitch, corrupted file imports, software incompatibility. But the woman swore she had saved screenshots. None were ever found. Today, the tablet is rarely discussed. Scholars mention it briefly in footnotes, often as an oddity, a curiosity in the annals of early writing, yet none deny its existence. It is real, held in a drawer labeled unclassified, cuneiform variant, locked, documented. But it is not quiet, not entirely. A recent visitor, an older man who once worked with the excavation team, was granted a viewing. He entered the archive with a notebook and magnifier. He sat alone for hours, and when the curator returned, she found him weeping, not loudly, not in fear, but in awe. He said only, "I think it was remembering something, because I did too." No one asked what he meant. His notes too were sparse, a sketch of the tablet, the words, "not to be read, to be remembered," and then a strange sequence, rows of slashes, wedges and spirals, not true cuneiform, but patterned, as if mimicking memory, or mirroring what was seen. Some say the tablet was made by a scribe who knew he was dying, that he wrote not to teach others, but to keep a part of himself alive in language, a memory loop etched in earth. Others believe it was never meant for humans at all, that it is a linguistic mirror, a voice folded so many times that it now speaks to its own echo. But all agree on one thing: when the tablet is brought out, the room shifts, not in temperature, in presence, as if something beneath the script is stirring, slowly, patiently, unfolding layer by layer, symbol by symbol, word remembering word, memory remembering shape. And in that deep and quiet moment, when all translation fails, when logic yields to rhythm, when language becomes reflection, you begin to feel it, not that you are reading the tablet, but that it is reading you, and it has not yet forgotten. The painted poplar plank that changed color. It began as a whisper, no more than the rustle of a dry leaf brushing against stone, in a hilltop necropolis, just outside what is now Tarquinia. The poppies still bloom with too much red in the spring, and beneath the bloom, long-forgotten tombs press quietly into the earth, carved chambers painted with dances and banquets, lions with coiling tongues, and owls that stare with knowing eyes. But one chamber was different. The archaeologists who opened it didn't expect to find much. By the time they reached it, other tombs had long since been catalogued, drawn, and photographed, their treasures long removed or plundered. This tomb had no name, no marker above it, no record in local archives. It had been hidden behind an unnatural bend in the sandstone corridor, blocked by a tumbled pile of debris that looked strangely intentional. The door was heavier than it should have been. The hinges weren't iron but some older alloy, corroded to a shimmering green. Inside, there was no sarcophagus, no urn, no bones, just a wall of polished poplar, darkened by time but intact. The plank stretched from floor to ceiling, 9 feet tall and nearly 5 feet wide, held in place by clamps that bore no visible markings. At first glance, the plank seemed ordinary, unpainted, blank, but when the light of the moon fell across it, on the third night after the tomb was opened, the pigment began to shift. It did not glow, it did not shimmer, but under moonlight, shadows within the grain of the wood deepened, lines began to emerge. At first they were faint, like breath on glass, then stronger, curling vines, twisting serpents, the outline of a figure cloaked in something that looked too much like feathers. And then, as the archaeologists stared in breathless silence, the scene on the panel changed. It didn't transform all at once, it flickered, subtly, like the ripple of light on water. Each night, the image was different. Under daylight or electric bulbs, it was only wood, but in moonlight, the painting awakened. One night, a funeral procession appeared, men in crimson cloaks and women with wreaths of olive and bone. Another night, a banquet, tables laid with silvered figs and small stiff birds whose eyes had been painted open. Always there was the central figure, a woman, they thought at first, wrapped in fabric that trailed like smoke. Her face was never clear, sometimes smiling, sometimes weeping, always watching. No one knew who she was, no inscription gave her name. The Etruscans had many gods, they recorded them carefully. Their funerary rites were elaborate, whole cities of the dead, arranged like mirror copies of the living. But this panel showed something different, not a god, not a mortal, something in between, something painted in a red that stained deeper each time it was seen. The researchers tried to replicate the light. They brought in filtered lamps, cool spectrums, even full-spectrum moon simulators. Nothing worked. The images would not reveal themselves under artificial glow. Only the moon, and only at a precise angle, could wake the pigment. They sent samples for testing. The wood was poplar, native to the region, and impossibly preserved. No sealant, no lacquer. The pigment included hematite and lapis, but something else, something that could not be identified. A mineral not found in the tomb, nor in nearby soils. Some said it matched a composition found near the Lipari Islands, where the volcanoes hum faintly even in sleep. Weeks passed, then months. Each image that emerged on the panel was photographed, catalogued, and cross-referenced. There was no clear sequence, no narrative, yet patterns emerged. The same raven appeared in 3 separate scenes, a cluster of dark grapes, always 12, a small child holding a flute, and always in the far corner, a shape like a doorway, barely visible, painted in negative space. One night, under a full moon that hung low and orange above the Tyrrhenian Sea, the panel displayed something no one could explain. The room itself, the tomb. It was as though the wood had become a mirror, the walls behind the viewers, the floor beneath them. The plank depicted the space exactly as it was, except empty, silent, lifeless. No researchers, no lamps, only the tomb, as it would look if no one had ever entered it. And in that painted silence, the central figure stood alone, facing the doorway, hands outstretched, not in welcome, but in warning. That was the last time the panel changed. After that night, the wood remained dark. No matter the moon's phase, no matter the light's angle, the pigment stayed dormant. The grain, once fluid and shifting, became dry, cracked, still. Attempts to remove the panel failed, the clamps wouldn't yield, tools snapped. One researcher claimed the wood itself resisted him, that it pulled back when touched, like skin recoiling from a burn. They closed the tomb. The official record describes the panel as a cultural anomaly. It is listed among other unexplained Etruscan artifacts, stylized and symbolic, possibly a funerary tradition lost to time. But the locals tell a different story. They say the tomb was never meant to be opened, that the woman in the painting was not being mourned, but bound, that the shifting pigment was not art, but memory, living, growing thinner with each viewing, until the last thread of silence snapped, and she was gone. Some say she was a seer, others say she was a priestess of something older than the Etruscan pantheon, a watcher of doors, they say, a speaker to shadows. The villagers who live near the necropolis won't walk that way after sunset. They say the panel doesn't need moonlight anymore. That sometimes, even through the stone, they feel the heat of unseen light flicker across the hillside. They say the plank still waits, wood grain darkening like old blood, for the right eyes. And on nights when the moon is high and no birds sing, if you press your ear to the tomb's stone wall, you might hear the faint rustle of fabric trailing across painted floors and the low, unending sound of someone watching you from just behind the paint. Not moving, not speaking, only waiting. The spiral-carved obsidian mirror. They said it was just a mirror, a circle of polished black stone, smooth as silence, older than the jungle that had swallowed it whole. But when the firelight hit it just right, the spirals began to move. No one wanted to believe that part, because if the spirals moved, then someone must have carved them to do so. And if someone had carved them, they'd known what it would do, what it would show, what it would awaken. But that's all story, isn't it? That's how things begin, when no one remembers the beginning. So let us walk back through the night, down through root and ruin, and brush away the dust that sleeps on the mirror's edge. Long before the mirror was found, long before it was lost, there was a hill of black glass near what is now known as Teotihuacan. The people who lived near it didn't have a word for obsidian, only for the knife that sings and the eye that stares. For them, the hill wasn't stone, it was a wound left by something that had fallen out of the sky long ago, maybe a god, maybe a thought. They harvested blades from its edge, but only the shamans walked toward the heart, and only one returned carrying a disc. It wasn't large, about the size of a man's open hand, but it was heavy, cold even under the sun, and when they polished it, only then did they see the spirals, not drawn, not etched, but woven into the very surface, endless and tangled, like a maze made of thought. It was placed on a red cloth, and set in a chamber built without doors. Only one man at a time could crawl into it, and once he was inside, no sound came out, not until he emerged. They say the first shaman who sat before the mirror didn't speak for 9 days. He just watched, blinkless, mouth open, unmoving, and when at last he whispered, he said, "I saw myself blink from the outside." The village elders tried to laugh, but they noticed his shadow didn't match his steps, and when he turned to speak, it turned away. Over generations, the mirror passed from hand to hand. Each custodian carved a spiral into their own home, small ones at first, then larger, deeper. The spirals turned up in pottery, in hair braids, even in songs. They said it helped to remember the path back from the mirror's center, because once you entered it, you weren't just watching a reflection, you were inside it. Then one night it was gone, not stolen, not taken, gone, as if it had stepped backward through its own reflection. The room where it was kept had no signs of entry. The red cloth lay undisturbed, only the smell of lightning remained, and a smear of blood in the spiral on the wall. For 1,000 years, no mention of it appears again, until a Spanish monk in 1536 described a cursed piece of Piedra de Diablo, a devil's stone buried in the floor of a crumbling temple near Lake Texcoco. He claimed it gave him visions, that he could see his past and his future at the same time, depending on which eye he closed. He wrote that the mirror asked him questions in his own voice, questions he didn't want to answer. The monastery burned the temple, but a servant hid the mirror beneath the floorboards. He was found days later, curled into a ball, both eyes open and blind, and the mirror vanished again. When it surfaced next, it was no longer in Mexico. A British collector in 1891 claimed to have acquired it from a witch widow in Veracruz. He displayed it briefly at the British Museum, though no one could agree on what it was. Some said Aztec, some said Mayan, some said it wasn't carved by hands at all. The collector was found dead beside it, his notes unreadable. The ink spiraled into nonsense. His heart had stopped, but his eyes were wide. They'd ruptured from the inside. The mirror was boxed away, forgotten, until one night in 1972, when a curator unlocked a misfiled crate. Inside, a red cloth, cracked with age, and atop it, a black disc that pulsed slightly when the flashlight beam hit it. Not literally pulsed, but the spirals caught the light in such a way that they seemed to tighten, as if focusing, as if watching back. She didn't speak of it for years, but her dreams changed. She dreamt of spiral staircases that led nowhere, of her reflection walking past without her. She stopped recognizing her own handwriting, started writing in spirals. Her cat refused to stay in the same room as the mirror. The museum quietly moved the piece to off-site storage, but not before one final X-ray was taken, and what it revealed was impossible. Inside the obsidian, beneath the surface, invisible to the eye, were layers, fine grooves carved in interlocking circles, too precise for human hands, too deep for ancient tools, and at the center of the spirals, hidden by the mirror's heart, a small cavity, empty, as if something had once been there, and had crawled out. By now the mirror had gained a quiet nickname among those who studied it. L'ojo inverso, the inverse eye. Some say it was never a tool at all. It wasn't meant to reflect or show. It was meant to remember, not for you, but for whatever watched through it. It was an archive, a lens, a door, and every time someone looked into it, it recorded a little more. In 2011, a private collector in Yucatan released a grainy video of a reactive obsidian artifact. No light, no voice, just a handheld mirror on a velvet stand, and a single candle. For 6 minutes, nothing happens. Then the candle flickers once. The spirals seem to flex, and in the mirror's surface, just for a breath, a second spiral appears, one that wasn't carved, one made of flickering motion. It stares straight back. The man who filmed the video deleted his account days later. His house was found empty, not abandoned. Empty. No dust, no signs of departure. Even his fingerprints were gone from the door handles. Today there are only fragments of the mirror's story. A shard here, a photo there. No one's certain who holds the original. No museum claims it. No auction has listed it. But every few years a pattern begins again. A symbol appears in carvings, a spiral too intricate to be accidental, drawn in the margins of journals, scratched into subway walls, etched into the condensation on a window. Spirals that don't repeat. That loop not outward, but inward. A linguist once tried to decode the grooves. She said it was a message, but not in words, in directions. She said if you traced them just right, you could follow a thought not your own. She stopped sleeping after that, and began whispering answers to questions no one asked. No one has traced the grooves all the way to the center. No one who's returned, at least, because the center is never still. It spins, not fast, but deep. A spin beneath thought, beneath time. Some believe the mirror isn't an object at all. It's a fragment, a piece of something larger, a machine that once measured minds, or summoned them. Others think it was never meant to be touched by humans, that it's a byproduct, a mirror made accidentally, left behind by a civilization not from elsewhere, but from here, before here was shaped. Because obsidian remembers, every blow, every cut, every scrape, stone forged by fire, glass made from earth's scream. What happens when you look into a mirror that remembers more than you do, that watches you not as you are, but as you were, before bones, before breath? What does it show? Not you, but the one who dreamed you. The spiral has no beginning, no end. It turns softly, endlessly, and every so often, it blinks. Tonight, the mirror is dark, hidden, maybe in a box, maybe behind a wall, maybe waiting, quietly, beneath the floorboards of a house whose owner has begun dreaming in black and glass. But wherever it is, it remembers you now, and in its surface, far down the spiral path, something has begun to move. Not fast, not loud, just enough to be seen. If you were to look again, if you were to listen, they say it was just a mirror, but you never saw your reflection blink again, after that. The blackened horn that echoes the sea. They dug it up by accident, as most such things are. An early spring morning, the kind where the frost still clings under the surface of the peat and the tools come back slick with blackened mud. The men were laying fiber optic cable near an abandoned farmstead in Sognefjorden. No one had lived there for 70 years. Not since the last of the family had simply vanished. Doors still shut, plates still stacked, boots left by the door with laces tied. The horn came up with the roots. At first glance it looked like driftwood curved and weather-beaten, but with a strange sheen to it, like something soaked too long in sea brine. One of the workers tapped it against a shovel. It rang, not loudly, no clang or chime, just a soft, low hum, like the last note of a whale's cry buried beneath the earth. They passed it around. It fit neatly into the palm, not long, not short, with a mouthpiece worn smooth. Carved along its length were wave-like patterns, spirals, peaks, and what looked like fish with too many eyes. One man, half laughing, raised it to his lips and blew. What came out was not music. It was the sea, not water, not spray, but the sound of a tide pushing against hollow cliffs. It rose out of the horn in a deep, mournful sigh, windless, breathless, but vast. The workers backed away. One dropped his phone and wouldn't pick it up again. Another stood staring at the horn bearer, not speaking, not blinking. They brought the horn to the local museum in Bergen. The staff there were used to odd things, Viking amulets, pre-Christian effigies, tools carved from whalebone, but this was different. They tested the horn, dated it. Horn of stag, they said, but not a kind of stag that exists now. Older, larger, an extinct subspecies whose antlers could reach nearly 8 feet across. But the horn had not fossilized. It was still warm to the touch. Worse, when they tried to X-ray it, the machine glitched, not broke, just stopped working until the horn was removed. The resulting scans showed not hollow channels, but something else, a shape within the horn, a spiral, not physical, a kind of echo pattern locked in the grain, repeating over and over again, like a song remembered by the bone. The museum kept it in a glass case, but strange things began to happen. Visitors reported hearing waves even when the horn wasn't blown. Soft, rhythmic surges, like surf through pine trees. A security guard claimed to hear gulls when he stood near it, and one child, 7 years old, eyes wide, said plainly to his father, "There's a boat in there. I saw the sail move." The curator took the horn home one night to examine it more closely. He was never seen again. His house was locked from the inside. The lights were still on, and his notes, normally meticulous, were soaked in salt water. The horn was returned to storage, sealed in a lead-lined box, and forgotten, until the fjord whispered again. You see, the locals near that region had long held an old tale, seldom told anymore, even among the oldest. They called it Hornet, the sea horn, said it belonged to a hunter who never returned from the deep wood, that he had found something in a cave, an altar carved into the base of a waterfall, where sea and stone kissed. There he had knelt, and when he rose, the horn was in his hand. They say he blew it once, and the sea answered, not just in sound, but in memory. He began to see ships that had never sailed, harpoons shaped like nautilus shells, towers rising from beneath the waves. He heard languages that churned like tides, and saw lights that moved underwater like stars trying to speak. He returned to the village, a different man. Salt crusted his eyelashes. He slept standing, always facing west. And when he died, no one touched the horn. They buried it with him, deep in the bog. But that bog, like all things in the north, shifts with time. A professor of folklore once tried to trace the horn's carvings. She found that the patterns did not match Viking or Sami art, nor Celtic, but instead, frighteningly, they resembled cave paintings from a drowned cave system off the coast of Doggerland, now deep beneath the North Sea. In those caves, archaeologists had found marks, tall, narrow waves scratched into stone, and horn shapes surrounded by dozens of spiral forms. Some believed it was the worship of sea gods, others, something stranger, not worship. Warning: the horn, when blown, doesn't just echo the sea, it remembers it. Not the sea as we know it, not blue and bound by shores, but the first sea, the one that had no moon to stir it, no names drawn across its edges. One diver, part of a team who borrowed the horn for acoustic testing, described something that still rattles in the vault of strange reports. He said, "Underwater, you can hear things the air hides." He said, when they submerged a speaker and played the horn's sound through the deep, something answered. Not a whale, not sonar, something slower, older, as if the ocean itself were taking a breath, and far beneath the boat, their instruments picked up a vibration, not movement, but pressure, as if something had opened. They never finished their expedition. Today, the horn is gone again, not stolen, no record of loan or sale, just misplaced. No one at the museum remembers exactly where it was stored. The records are vague, overwritten, missing. But there are stories of a woman in Tromsø who hears surf in her dreams, of a fisherman in Lofoten who tied himself to his boat and drifted west, playing an old tune on a carved black horn. He never returned, but his boat did, dripping with water. its hull etched with spirals, and then, just last year, a recording surfaced online. 30 seconds of sound, uploaded without comment. Just the black screen, and a noise like distant waves crashing against ice, followed by one hollow, rising note, like a call or a reminder. In the background, someone says, "It's not wind." The file was taken down within the hour. They say the horn is part of something larger, not an artifact, but a key. One note among many, an orchestration meant to call back what sleeps beneath the folds of the sea. Because there are places off the Norwegian coast where compasses fail, where birds will not fly, where old mariners once threw their wedding rings into the water before sailing through, and when asked why, they'd say only, "It listens." Perhaps the horn was never meant for land. Perhaps it was made not by humans, but for them to test who could hear, who would answer, to carry the sound of an ancient tide into ears too young to remember their beginning. And in that sound, something stirs. A shape with no name, a tide that remembers you, and if you blow the horn, if you dare to lift it to your lips and let your breath pass through what once echoed the first waters, then be ready. For what echoes back may not be yours alone. The sea does not forget, nor do the things that move beneath it. Softly, endlessly, waiting for a sound they recognize. A homecoming note, the call of the blackened horn. The totem with shuttered eyes. They say the eyes were never meant to be seen, not by daylight, nor by torchlight, not even by those who carved them. The totem, they claim, came first with sight, piercing, wide, ever watchful, and only later was it blindfolded, not out of reverence, not out of shame, but fear. A fear older than speech, deeper than rivers, older than the forests that once stood in uninterrupted silence across the continent. This is a tale pulled gently from the misted edge of the world, from where the fog doesn't lift but thickens with every step forward, along the far coastlines of what is now British Columbia, where trees stand like cathedral columns and the moss never dries. There once was a village, a quiet one, unassuming, nestled at the crook of a cold, rocky inlet, where the tide whispered secrets and seals watched from a distance. That village had no name you could write, only one you could sing, and even then, only when the wind agreed. At the center of the village, far back from the shingle-covered shore, stood a totem. It was unlike the others, taller, heavier, more intricate. While other poles bore animals, raven, bear, killer whale, frog, this one bore only one figure, humanoid perhaps, but bent, hunched, almost coiled within itself. Its arms wrapped tight around its chest, its fingers like roots or claws, and its eyes, they were covered, not carved shut. No, that would have been art. This was something else. These eyes had been carved wide, circular, deeply gouged into the cedar, and into each hollow had been pressed something warm, golden, and hard, amber, thick slabs of it, polished smooth, like lens glass, and sealed with a strange pitch no one could remove, no matter how they tried. The villagers told stories, always in hushed tones, never directly. No one spoke about the totem, they only spoke around it, like a fire left burning too long, or a wolf that returned after being driven away. The totem was older than any elder, older than the name of the inlet, older than the stories themselves, and yet, it stood in the middle of the square, unmoved, untouched, and unclaimed. No clan would accept ownership of it, no one repaired it when the rains came, but still it did not rot. The wood blackened, yes, the moss crept up from the base, but the figure remained, watching, blindfolded. One record survives, a journal fragment, recovered by a coastal surveyor in the early 1900s. The man had spent the better part of 2 summers mapping the broken shoreline and fallen fishing settlements in the region. He made a sketch of the totem and noted its placement precisely between the long-abandoned house beams. But more than the measurements, more than the names he tried to piece together from elders further inland, he wrote one thing again and again in his journal: the eyes. I swear they watched. He returned alone, the record says. Not with a team, not with a guide. He went back by himself, claiming he wanted to trace the carving style. When his rowboat washed ashore days later, splintered and adrift, his compass was still tied to his wrist. But he was not in it. People say the totem's eyes were open then. Long before that story though, long before ink and surveyors and the colonial maps, the people who lived along the inlet had other explanations. The old ones, as they would say, had seen what happens when certain stories go ignored. They said the figure was not made by human hands, that the pole was not carved, but grown, found standing, fully shaped, in a circle of dead trees after a storm. Some say it was brought inland by the sea, others say it rose from the ground during a red tide. Either way, the story agrees, no one made it, yet there it stood. A group of fishermen had been the first to find it. Leaning half buried in silt and barnacles, it was heavier than it should have been, as if the wood had turned to stone. Still, they carried it, roped it with cedar bark and dragged it up the stony trail. Once it stood in the square, the village changed, slowly, subtly. Voices became quieter, drums were played less often. The children played farther and farther from the center of the village, not out of scolding, but out of instinct. And then came the dreams. One by one, villagers began waking with the same memory, standing beneath the totem, alone, as its eyes slowly peeled away from their amber seals. Behind those golden lenses, the sockets were not dark. They shone, faintly, wetly, impossibly, with the reflection of firelight and waves. And they wept. The people tried to burn it, once, but the fire would not catch. The oil ran down the figure's arms like blood, but no flame took root. The next day, the men who tried to light the fire all came down with fever. They raved in sleep. Some never woke. After that, the totem remained untouched, but one elder, it said, took it upon herself to seal the eyes. She traveled deep into the forest and returned with 2 thick discs of amber, cut from an ancient trade necklace said to have come from far inland, passed down through many hands. She polished them with fish oil and deer sinew, placed them inside the hollows, and sealed the edges with birch pitch, singing a low, wordless tone as she worked. The dreams stopped, but the totem stayed. Years passed, generations shifted. The village moved further downriver, then disappeared entirely. Yet no one ever claimed the land. Travelers noted the clearings, but felt uneasy there. One missionary recorded in his diary that he'd camped beside a strange, solitary totem pole, but woke with frost on his eyelashes in midsummer. His guide refused to return. He never did either. What then was this figure? Some believe it's a guardian, that it watches for something beneath the soil or sea, and the amber seals were meant to protect us, not from it, but from what it sees. Others say it's a warning, a last record of a creature that once lived among the trees, mimicking human form, twisting it like branches grown in shadow, a being with no eyes of its own, only mirrors. The patterns on its arms were not purely decorative. No 2 curves matched. Each swirl, each carved hollow, was said to match the eddies in the nearby inlet. A map, perhaps, of tides, or something else. Cycles. On moonless nights, when mist clings to bark, and even the owls fall silent, the clearing still exists. The moss has grown thicker, the forest creeps inward, but if you listen, some say, you can hear the sound of slow, deliberate breathing, deep within the earth. And if you find the totem, if you approach with caution and a steady heartbeat, you may find it changed. The amber slightly shifted, warmer to the touch, or hollow, as though the eyes were no longer behind them. A traveler once left an offering at the totem's feet, a polished stone and a silver coin. When they returned the next day, both were gone, but in their place, nestled in the moss, was a small piece of amber, unsealed, unshaped, and inside it, tiny, almost imperceptible, was the reflection of the traveler's own eye. Looking back, they say the totem is only blind when we're watching, that it opens its eyes only in silence, in stillness, when no gaze disturbs it, and what it sees, it never tells. But sometimes, just sometimes, you'll feel it, a soft shift in air, a flicker of light, where there shouldn't be any, the sense that something old, very old, is remembering you, and in that moment, you'll know the totem never forgot, it only waited. The sapphire signet of the lost prince. They found it where the forest still breathes like a living thing, where roots twist through stone, and the stones themselves are swallowed whole by time, deep in the overgrown ruins of a temple with no surviving name, hidden within the folds of Cambodia's oldest jungles. There it rested, coiled in centuries of silence and dirt. The ring, the sapphire, wasn't gleaming when it was discovered. In fact, it had grown so dull with soil and soot that no one knew it was a gemstone at first. It looked more like a deformed coin, or a broken bead from a long crumbled idol. Only later, when it was brushed free of the filth of time, did the shape come clear, a wide golden band, flattened at the top, not rounded like modern rings, and in its crown, inset with perfect precision, was a square-cut blue stone the color of deep water just before a storm. Around its edge, running along the face and circling the stone like a guardrail, were letters, curved, elegant, and utterly unreadable. No script matched. Not Sanskrit, not Old Khmer, not anything known to epigraphy. And yet etched into the center of the stone, more vivid than any of the unknown letters, was a single figure, a stylized flame, enclosed in a shape that almost looked like a lotus bud, or perhaps a closed eye. They called it a seal, a signet, the kind that would leave a mark in wax or clay, the kind once worn by kings. But no king had ever been found in the crumbling walls where the ring lay. No name ever matched the seal, and no body had ever been recovered from the shrine, not even a trace. They said he was a prince, but none knew his name. There's a story that echoes through the countryside, one older than the temples, older even than the dynasty that built Angkor Wat. It tells of a boy born during a silent eclipse, a boy with a voice like falling leaves, and a gaze that startled elephants. He was not the son of the reigning monarch, nor was he of royal lineage, but the astrologers declared him marked by something ancient, something neither benevolent nor cruel, but watching. So the king took him in, raised him as one of his own, and gave him a tutor, a name, a silk robe, and a seat at court. But he was no ordinary child. The boy had a habit of walking alone at night, past the crocodile pools, past the carved Naga bridges, into the thickest parts of the sacred groves. When asked where he'd been, he'd say nothing, only that he listened, and the earth had spoken. He wrote in a language none could read. He carved symbols into sandalwood slats and never read them twice. He was seen whispering to statues, sketching spirals in dust, tracing invisible paths along the steps of shrines, older than the kingdom itself. And then one day, he vanished. No blood, no broken walls, no signs of flight, only his ring was missing from the royal treasury, and the script, the same script later found on the stone, was never seen again. The archaeologists who unearthed the temple didn't expect to find anything intact. Most ruins in that part of the jungle had long been stripped by humidity and looters, but this one was different. The temple had no roads leading to it, no visible moat, no surrounding city, just a single square structure, half collapsed, its towers hunched like monks in prayer. It was quiet there, too quiet. Even the insects avoided the center. When they reached the altar, they found no idol, no statue, just a circular depression in the stone, the size of a human hand, and in the middle of that was a ring, half buried in fine ash. One man picked it up. He later said it was warm. He didn't sleep that night. He claimed he heard words that weren't words, that something old had remembered him. He put the ring down the next day and refused to return. There is something strange about the seal on the sapphire. It isn't symmetrical, not quite. At first glance, it appears to be, but when examined closely under magnification, it becomes clear the flame bends slightly, as if blown by wind. And the lotus shape around it isn't truly a lotus. It has too many points, too many curves. Some say it's an eye, others say it's a gate. One expert noticed something stranger. He found that if you trace the flame with a stylus in one continuous motion, starting from the base, you'll draw a spiral. Not a perfect one, but one that tightens with every loop, drawing you inward. It has no natural end point. Some believe it's a map, a kind of puzzle, that the ring is not a seal at all, but a key. But a key to what? No one agrees. A hidden chamber, a tomb, a door beneath the jungle. Theories abound, but none of them explain why the ring seems to disappear. 3 times it's gone missing from collections. Once from a museum vault in Phnom Penh, another from a private collector's safe in France, a third from a transport crate en route to Singapore. In each case, it reappeared days later. But not where you'd expect. It was always found resting on bare earth, in a garden, at the foot of a shrine, on the banks of a quiet stream, as if something was trying to return it, or send it back. Some scholars whisper a darker tale, that the prince who wore the ring was never meant to be born, that his existence was a correction of something unbalanced, a momentary pause in a larger cycle, and that the ring was not a symbol of power, but of imprisonment. The script carved around the stone may not be a name. It might be a lock, or a prayer, or a warning. Some lines translate, when matched to proto-scripts found in much older, far deeper ruins beneath the region's older monsoon-built mounds. The fragments offer this: let silence carry what cannot be spoken, and to see the flame is to remember what was forgotten. But most chilling of all, he left no shadow behind. An elder who once worked as a site guide near the jungle tells this story. She was young then, barely 16. She led visitors through the edge of the ruins, but never to the sealed temple at the center. One day, an old man came, foreign, but quiet, respectful. He wore a pendant shaped like a spiral, and asked no questions, only listened. He stayed for hours near the temple's edge. When she returned to check on him, he was gone, and on the ground where he sat was the ring. She swears she never touched it. But that night, she dreamed of stone corridors lit with blue fire, of water flowing upward, of voices that sang in reverse. When she woke, she found a small spiral drawn on her palm, in ash. The ring was gone by morning. She never guided again. Some say the prince is still alive, not in flesh, but in memory, that the ring remembers its wearer the way a fire remembers a spark, that whoever touches it becomes part of the unfinished story, a story etched not in time but in shape. Others claim the ring is cursed, that to wear it is to disappear not from the world, but from its record, that names, memories, even faces blur and fall away until no trace remains. Only the ring, and the sealed flame at its center. They say the last person who wore it stood before a mirror and saw nothing looking back. The ring is currently held in a climate-controlled vault in an unnamed location, or so the records claim, but others believe it's back in the forest, returned by unseen hands, waiting in the hollow of a stone beneath a canopy of leaves that never stop whispering. And if you ever come upon it, half hidden in moss, humming faintly in the heat, you may feel something stir, not fear, not wonder, but recognition, like remembering a dream you never had, like reading a name you somehow once knew, and seeing that name vanish, just before you could say it aloud. The miniature ship buried in a sarcophagus, beneath a tomb long sealed with pitch and salt, in a chamber forgotten even by those who built it, lay a sarcophagus untouched by time. It was carved from a single block of red quartzite, its lid unmarked, its edges sealed so precisely that not even the desert's finest dust had entered. There were no cartouches etched into its sides, no gods painted on the walls around it, no funerary texts to guide the soul through the underworld. It was, for all appearances, a king's tomb without a name. But when the lid was finally shifted, by a team of archaeologists certain they were unsealing the grave of an unknown pharaoh, what they found inside was not what anyone expected. There was no mummy, no linen wrappings, no canopic jars, not even the dust of bones. Instead, resting on a smooth stone platform where a royal body should have lain, was a boat just under a meter long, carved with impossible delicacy, not a funerary bark like the ones buried beside the pyramids, not a symbolic vessel meant for the soul's passage to the field of reeds. No, this one was different. It was miniature, yes, but it was precise. It had masts, it had deckboards, rigging made of thread that had not rotted, oars made of cedar, each one carved so thin they bent slightly in the air, a rudder designed to pivot, and tiny copper rings, fused to the bow, where a rope might have been tied, but there was no rope, no name, no dock, and no reason for it to exist. There are many models of boats in Egypt's ancient tombs. They are often crude, symbolic, rushed, even more gesture than replica. But this one was flawless. Every joint was sealed. Every curve matched the engineering of real ships that would not appear until centuries later. Experts examined it and found methods of joinery and balance that shouldn't have been possible for the era. Wood that didn't match the local species, shell inlays that came from coasts hundreds of miles away, and at the tip of its bow, set like an eye, was a single stone, smooth, round and polished to a faint blue shine. Not lapis, not turquoise, something else, something no one could quite identify. The tomb was deep, deeper than most kings were buried. It lay beneath an older necropolis, one thought to have been exhausted decades earlier. The entrance was found accidentally, when a section of cliff collapsed during a storm, revealing a shaft carved into solid limestone. There were no stairs, no paint, just a straight drop, and a rope ladder that had long since crumbled to dust. When the archaeologists descended, they noticed something strange. There were no hieroglyphs, not on the shaft walls, not on the door lintels, not even on the seal that once covered the tomb's entrance. No signs of Re or Osiris, no winged scarabs, no ankhs, no reed or bee symbols of royalty. And yet, inside that tomb was unmistakable care. The sarcophagus had been set with reverence, the chamber was swept clean, and the boat, centered with surgical precision, was bound with linen strips at each corner, as if to keep it from drifting in dreams. But dreams of what? There is a theory, circulated quietly, often dismissed by orthodox scholars, that not every pharaoh ruled a land of earth and stone. Some ruled over things less tangible, over transitions, over silences, over moments that do not belong to the waking world. The unknown king of the miniature ship, they say, may not have been a king in life at all, but in the realm between sleep and memory, a pharaoh of crossings, a keeper of thresholds. In Alexandria, a conservator tasked with preserving the boat once left her workstation for the evening. She locked the chamber and returned the next morning. The room was undisturbed, no alarms had tripped, no one had entered, and yet the boat was wet, not soaked, but damp, just enough for condensation to appear on the glass case. The base of the vessel had left a faint mark on the velvet it rested on, like a tide had touched it. Tests revealed no leaks, no pipes, no source of moisture, but for 3 more nights it happened again, and then it stopped. Those who have studied the boat closely have noticed oddities. The wood grain spirals clockwise, even on the flat planks. The inlays along the hull, tiny flecks of shell and enamel, appear random at first, but under polarized light they form a pattern, a coiling path, like a river seen from above. Some believe it is the Nile, others believe it is not a river at all, but a boundary, a route followed only once, and only in the absence of breath. Among the few inscriptions found near the tomb, scrawled in charcoal on a rock half a mile away, was a single phrase: "He sailed before dawn where no sail has cast shadow." It was dismissed as poetic nonsense at first, but then a linguist noticed the phrasing matched a style from Old Kingdom funerary stelae, phrasing reserved not for mortals, but for those considered semi-divine, not kings, not gods, but guides. There is no record of such a figure, no statue, no temple, no offering lists, but among the stories whispered by desert guides and passed down through generations of tomb robbers, there is mention of a boat that moves between worlds, not on water, but between places of stillness, places where time curls and forgets to resume. They say the ship appears only at night, that it waits near tombs that should not be opened, that it creaks in the windless dark, despite having no sail to catch the breeze. They say it is never seen more than once, but its sound is unmistakable, like rope tightening, like oars drawing breath, like a vessel being readied for something. One old man claimed to have seen it. He was a guardian of a site far to the south, unnamed on most maps, unvisited by tourists. He tended the outer grounds of a collapsed temple and kept the jackals from entering. One night, while walking his perimeter, he said he heard the unmistakable sound of creaking wood. He turned and saw nothing, only an impression in the sand, long, narrow, tapered at both ends, as if something had settled there, as if a miniature boat, far too light to be real, had come to rest for a moment and left before it was noticed. When asked if he believed it was the same ship from the nameless sarcophagus, he smiled faintly. "No," he said, "that boat waits in silence." This one was listening. Attempts to carbon date the wood have returned conflicting results. One test suggested 3,400 years, another less than 900. A third returned no date at all, only noise, as if the sample didn't belong to the measurable world. Some have proposed that the boat is a recreation, that it was a ritual object, modelled after a real ship once used by the court or for sacred journeys. But if so, why no records? Why no name? And why would the only object interred in a royal sarcophagus be something no one ever saw sail? Unless it did, but not here. In a forgotten archive in Luxor, a set of scroll fragments mention a craft called Marutket, the channelless boat. It was said to appear only at dusk, to be summoned without words, and to carry a soul not across water, but across silence. Only one line is fully legible. Its sail is the breath withheld. Its anchor is the name unspoken. No mention of its builder, no rites for its launch, just the echo of something once believed, and then buried. The boat remains in a museum vault. Curators report no incidents. It is safe, secure, unchanging, and yet, every so often, a camera malfunctions near its case, or the humidity monitor fails. Despite no signs of actual moisture, a draft is felt where no air should move, and once, just once, the sound of water lapping was caught faintly on a late-night security feed. The tape was reviewed, then it was misplaced, and no one could recall who recorded it. Perhaps the ship never needed a dock, perhaps its only harbor was the stillness inside the stone, or perhaps it is still waiting, not for water, not for wind, but for a name, the name that was never carved, never written, the name of a king with no crown, the one who crossed in silence and left only a vessel behind, perfect, small and impossibly still. The lightning-struck doorway of Chavin. High in the misty folds of the Peruvian Andes lies a complex of stones older than the Inca, older than most memory dares to stretch. Chavin de Huanta, an ancient ceremonial center, a place of tunnels and echoes and carved gods with blank eyes and curling fangs. The site is quiet now. Visitors tread lightly across its stone thresholds, whisper beneath its leaning walls, run fingers over the carvings of jaguar men and serpent mouths. But the air still moves strangely here. Sound travels oddly. Water disappears into channels that hum faintly underground. And every structure, every plaza, staircase and hallway aligns with something unseen, as though built by instruction no longer spoken. But there is one feature in particular, one doorway that locals avoid. A stone threshold, not remarkable in size, set into the wall of a sunken court, cracked straight down the middle, not crumbled, not weather-worn, just one clean break, the kind that no chisel makes, the kind that does not widen with time, as if it split in a single moment, as if it were struck, directly, and only it, by lightning. Storms do come to Chavin, but they come rarely, and when they do they roll in slowly over the mountains, curtains of grey mist, not spears of fire. Lightning is scarce here, thunder muffled, rain more fog than downpour, and yet this single stone doorway bears the unmistakable sign of a strike, not shattered, but opened, as if something once closed had been forced ajar, not outward, not inward, but inward, and down. The surrounding stones are unmarked, not scorched, not chipped, just this one, the stone that frames a shadowed passage, a hallway that leads to a place few walk anymore, not out of superstition, but because the air changes when you approach it. The entrance was once part of the old ceremonial axis of Chavin. Priests, masked and humming with substances that blurred the boundaries of form, would descend into the dark with offerings. They did not bring fire, they moved by feel, following channels carved beneath the earth. Water carried sound deep through these tunnels, whispers could be heard from impossible distances. Some say the passages were designed not just for ritual, but for transformation, a place where the human was stripped away, where something else entered, or emerged. The cracked doorway sits at the edge of that network. Visitors once believed it was simply a frame, an entry point into a hallway that had collapsed, but LiDAR scans revealed that the passage behind it continues, perfectly intact. A corridor preserved for over 2,000 years, and behind that, an inner chamber, octagonal, aligned with the rising sun on the solstice. Inside it, a stone basin, empty, but carved with grooves too precise for mere decoration, and on the wall behind it, half covered by collapse, an inscription. Not in Quechua, not in any recognizable Andean script, just a single motif, repeated 3 times, a zigzag line between 2 circles. Lightning. Legends among the locals tell of El Rayo Dormido, the sleeping bolt, a force buried, not fallen, a spark from the sky, kept not in a jar, but in stone. They say it was once called down, not by accident, but invitation, summoned, not suffered, and that when it struck the doorway, it did not end something, it began. In the 1970s, a researcher named Esteban Rivas spent 6 months mapping the internal passages of Chavin. He recorded every tunnel, every shaft, every niche, too small for a human, but carved nonetheless. But he avoided the cracked doorway, not out of disinterest, but because his compass would not function near it. Batteries drained, tape hissed, even the chalk he used to mark his path crumbled in his hand when he stepped across the split threshold. He wrote in his journal, "The air here is not old, it is alert, it waits," and then, without explanation, he left the site. He did not publish his findings. He did not return. In 1998, lightning did strike Chavin again. This time, it struck the edge of the northern plaza. No damage, but power in the town below flickered. A local teacher reported every wristwatch in her class jumped forward by 8 minutes. Only once, no explanation, and none of the children remembered the gap. The stone itself, the one split by lightning, was examined closely in 2006. Petrographic analysis showed an unusual pattern. Not a break, but a zipper. Minerals along the crack had partially fused, something only possible if the stone had been subjected to extreme heat, but with no scorching. As though the strike had passed not over the surface, but through the atomic lattice of the stone, unzipping and sealing at once. The scientists offered no official explanation. They moved on, but one of the team years later claimed he heard something while taking the core sample. Not from the stone itself, but from the space just beyond it. A low sound, repetitive, rhythmic, not a machine, not a voice, but a pulse. Local children avoid playing near the threshold, not out of fear, but because they say it makes them forget. They step toward it, and time seems to change. Not stretch, not rush. Just skip. They arrive home with mud on their shoes and no memory of rain. With drawings they don't recall making. One boy, 7 years old, spoke a word no one recognized after playing near the doorway. It was not Quechua, it was not Spanish, and when asked to repeat it, he said, "I didn't say that." Shamans from the surrounding highland communities have come to Chavin in secret, not for tourists, not for grants, but to leave offerings at the base of the split stone. They do not enter the passage, they do not step across the threshold. They place coca leaves at the crack, whisper, leave, always with their eyes lowered. One elder said the stone is not a doorway, but a mirror, one that shows not reflections, but what watches from the other side. When asked what might have caused the lightning to strike there, only there, geologists were silent. The rock has no magnetic properties, no metals nearby, no elevated rods, and yet, during electrical storms, the compass still spins, sound still thins, and shadows still behave. Strangely, one photographer captured the doorway during a storm. The photo showed no rain, no lightning, but behind the stone through the passage was a faint glow, greenish, like moss in a cave, but brighter and shaped like a figure leaning away. There was no one in the room when the photo was taken, no source for the light, and when they returned to recreate the shot, the glow did not appear again. Those who study ancient cultures often speak of Axis Mundi, the world axis, a place where the upper and lower worlds meet, a point of exchange, not just physical, but spiritual. Some believe Chavin was such a place that its chambers were designed to confuse the senses on purpose, to fracture the mind, to prepare it for communication, not with gods, but with else. The cracked doorway, then, may not have been an accident. It may have been a bell, a summons, or a mark, burned into the structure to say, this one, not by the builders, not by the priests, but by what they once waited for, and perhaps still do. You can stand before it now. The doorway is quiet. The crack runs down its center like a closed eye. You can press your hand to it. It will feel cold, smooth, but hold it there long enough. And some claim the chill changes, that your breath hitches, that behind your closed eyes, you'll see something. Not an image, not a place, but a shape trying to be remembered. And when you pull your hand away, you'll find the skin tingling, though the air is still. And you might notice your watch runs a few seconds fast. And you might think of a word you've never heard, but feel you once knew. And you might feel as though the doorway is not done with you, that it waits. Not to open, but to open you. The time-locked sundial of Petra. In the rose-colored cliffs of southern Jordan, where sandstone mountains fold like frozen waves and wind carves silence through stone, lies a city once lost to time. Petra, half-built, half-born from rock. Its temples and tombs rise from the valley walls, their facades melted by centuries of sand and heat. Once a nexus of trade, gold and incense, now it stands like a dream half-remembered. But among its famous facades and vast carved halls, there is one chamber that appears in no tour guides. No signs point to it, no ropes bar its entrance. It is not hidden, but it hides. A narrow niche in the far canyon wall, beyond the colonnaded street and past the disused cisterns, where few wander and fewer linger. There, embedded within a quiet alcove, lies a carving no larger than a dinner plate, a sundial, flat against the wall, invisible for most of the year, except twice, at dawn on the summer and winter solstices. A strange thing happens in Petra. For no more than 12 minutes, a shaft of sunlight slips between the jagged cliffs in the east, travels a precise corridor of air, and touches that hidden niche with the soft urgency of a whisper. And in that moment, only in that moment, the sundial awakens. The lines carved in its surface light up in sequence, not by trick of shadow, but as if the light remembers where to go, as if it is not striking stone, but reading it. The sundial's markings are unlike any known in the Nabatean world. The Nabateans, master architects of Petra, left behind remarkable engineering, aqueducts, temples, massive reservoirs. Their calendar was celestial, their city aligned to stars and solstice. But the lines on this sundial aren't in Nabatean script, nor Greek, nor Aramaic. They curve in ways that resemble time more than they resemble language. The central gnomon, the raised spike that casts the shadow, is thin as a needle, and entirely made of a stone not found in Petra, a black mineral that does not reflect, does not warm in sun, and curiously, does not weather. It remains unchanged, unmoved, cold, no matter the heat. The sundial cannot be photographed clearly. Tourists who happen upon it report their phones crashing. Film warps, digital cameras blur, but the human eye sees it just fine. In fact, too fine. Visitors say the moment the sun touches it, the lines seem to shimmer, not glow, not sparkle, but move, as if they adjust in real time, not to the sun's angle, but to the observers, as if reading back. A scholar named Amal Kassar visited the site for 7 solstices in a row. She mapped every angle, every line, measured with precision how the sunlight reached the niche, and yet she could never replicate the dial's accuracy, except on those 2 days. On any other day, it's just a carved stone. No shadow, no clarity. But during the solstices, it doesn't just show the time, it shows a time, not the present, a time before, and perhaps after. On the winter solstice of her 4th visit, Amal stood before the dial at the exact moment of alignment. The sun touched the niche, the dial came alive, and Amal saw something more than she'd ever recorded. A flicker of motion behind her, though no one else was there. A shadow, hers, but not hers, not quite, a detail off. The head turned slightly before she did, the hand rising just after hers lowered, and when she looked back to the dial, the lines had shifted. There was now a 4th ring, one that hadn't existed before, marked with a single notch, the exact moment she was standing in. She documented the change, but when she returned the next year, the 4th ring was gone, replaced by another. Not where hers had been, but where it would be, next. As if the sundial had moved forward, as if it had remembered. Legends from Bedouin tribes around Petra tell of a clock that speaks to the sky. They say once, long ago, a caravaner followed the sundial's path through the canyons and was never seen again. Not lost, but displaced. Seen once, years later, aged not a day. Speaking in riddles, carrying a coin with no mint, stamped with a year no one could place. He disappeared again. Some say he found the hour not meant to be seen. Others say he stepped into it. Archaeologists who've studied the niche found something even stranger. Behind the dial, inside the rock wall, lies a cavity, a perfectly hollow chamber, no larger than a shoebox, cut so cleanly that it's often mistaken for modern interference, but it's original. The stone around it undisturbed, no tool marks, no explanation, and inside it, nothing, not air, not dust, a space without echo, without time. During a rare summer storm, lightning once struck the cliff directly above the niche. The rest of Petra was unaffected, but the Newman, normally inert, glowed faintly for hours, not with heat, but with a color, a deep violet shimmer, visible only from certain angles. Those who looked at it directly saw nothing, but those who glimpsed it peripherally reported strange sensations, not visions, not voices, but memories that weren't theirs. One visitor, a pilot from Spain, said the moment the sundial lit up, he suddenly remembered an entire day of his life, but from the perspective of someone watching him. Someone standing in the corner of a cafe he hadn't noticed, remembered in perfect detail, clothing, sound, scent, but the cafe had been empty, or so he'd thought. Theories abound. Some say the sundial isn't a timekeeper at all, it's a trigger, a recorder, a kind of cosmic stamp pad that marks when time brushes against itself, that the solstices, when the sun stands still in the sky, are cracks in the order of hours, moments when time hesitates, and that this dial doesn't tell the time, it tells when time listens, twice a year, 12 minutes. The sundial appears, 12 minutes, where your shadow may not be yours, where your memories might stutter, where your presence leaves an imprint. Some visitors say they feel watched when they stand before it, not by eyes, but by the moment itself, as if the present is taking notes, as if now becomes aware of itself. And after the sunlight fades, the niche returns to shadow, the dial vanishes, the Newman dulls, but some claim they leave with more than they brought. A slight shift in their thoughts, a new tick in their watch, unexplained, a dream that loops, a phrase they can't remember learning, lodged like a thorn behind their teeth, and months later, when the next solstice approaches, some feel drawn to return, not out of curiosity, but out of obligation, as if the moment remembers them too, as if the dial expects a visitor, not just any you. Some artifacts refuse to be explained. They hum, whisper, change under moonlight, or simply wait, silent, watching. Thank you for exploring with Unearthed Secrets, where every mystery is real, and nothing is quite what it seems.